is my culture, what is the culture of the country that I'm going to, and how can we meet? How can I teach the Dhamma, the Satana Dhamma, the eternal Dhamma, in a way that people in that different culture understand? So if you go to Europe, for instance, and you go morning hours, you go hungry. Nobody will stand under the Rome and give you food. Okay? Not the culture. Yeah? It's even more. If you think, okay, maybe they don't want to give us rice in the morning. Maybe they give us donation for. No, they also don't. The Thai people in Europe will, but not non-Thai people. Why? Because it's not the culture. It's better like this? Okay, thank you so much. Thank you. Because Europe has a very different thought history. That means people used to be Christian, but they went also through a very dramatic change that we call the era of enlightenment in Western philosophy. In Western philosophy, we call it 16th, 17th century, the era of enlightenment, and it has nothing to do with Bodhi, with awakening. It has to do with the idea that humans emancipate themselves from the Christian God and from the theologians. They said instead of the church telling you what to think, they said in Latin, sapere aude sapere, dare to think for yourself. That is the beginning of Western individualism. So not the community is important anymore, but what you think yourself. Actually, we see that to extreme now in politicians like Donald Trump. Because for him, what is truth is what he thinks, no matter what is true. There is no truth anymore, it's just what he thinks. Yeah? So this is all this kind of that starts with the European philosophy of rationalism, of enlightenment. And it means that through a confluence of Protestantism and Western philosophy, we get capitalism. The idea that you have to strive for yourself to have a good life, and even some Protestant Christian schools say, if you are if you are successful and wealthy, then it shows that God loves you. So we get this thing. And the consequence is what we find in the industrialization in the 19th century. We find the falling away of community spirit, the falling away of religion, of ethics, and the strive for money and power. So the next thing then I would advise for you, if you go to Europe, and I advise the preceptors around, please preceptors, whoever you send to Europe and America, very closely look into the heart of the people. You need somebody who is humble and stable in themselves, so is not seduced by money and power, and by the freedoms that Western society sometimes bring. So you need mature people who are humble, who are grounded in the practice, grounded in shamatha, and then in vipassana. But I would say shamatha is here the most important thing, because the onslaught of consumerism and capitalism in America and in Europe is very, very difficult. And you know that there are some monks who came to Europe and had problems. Yeah? Even in the Netherlands we had this. Yeah? Problems with money, problems with improper relationships, made a lot of scandals. And scandals is not good for Buddhism. Then people think, well, look, why should I practice Buddhism? They are just so bad as the Christian priests. Yeah? They just want money, and they just abuse the women, or they just want power. So please, preceptors, whoever you send, make sure it's very grounded and stable and humble, yeah? And not interested in power and money. Now, so globalization beyond Asia is actually something that happened already from the 18th centuries on. We talk from the 18th, 19th century on, we talk about thin globalization. That's a specific term we use in academia for the study of globalization, where you have cultural, cross-cultural contacts and cross-fertilizations, but on a very low intensity. For instance, there were merchants, there were some scholars, there were some elite contacts, but it is not so that the huge masses of people came to Asia or came to Europe or to America. Yeah? So a low intensity. And then from the late 19th century onwards, you get what we call thick globalization, where there's a high intensity and impact of those. And that has to do with settling down of imperialism and colonialism, especially the British Empire, and the colonial mindset, the colonialists starting to get interested in mainly archaeological, mainly in the ancient forms of thought and philosophy. And then some people in the culture, especially in Sri Lanka, was very important at that time, actually react to that, and actually start a dialogue. And some people then from the West start to convert to Buddhism and start propagating. And at the other hand, people from Asia start taking over Western ideas and implementing that in the form of Buddhism. As you know, Sri Lankan Buddhism before the mid of the 19th century was very much in decline. Buddhism was very much practiced in the villages. The monks were not really highly organized anymore in the monasteries. They were mainly village monks who did rituals. There was not very strong practice of meditations anymore. That changed as in dialogue with the colonialists, who actually looked at the old texts for the first time, for the Pali text. They saw the richness of thought and meditation practices, and some reform monks, especially in Sri Lanka, started changing that. And this renewed the whole Sangha, of the now 3 different Nikayas in Sri Lanka, had a huge impact on Theravada Buddhism globally. So we find with the 19th century onwards, we find the start of what we call modernity or modernism, also of Buddhism in Asia, already in a dialogue and cross-fertilizing with the West. So I skipped that. The early contacts, they are also there. Just in case you haven't heard that, there is a Christian legend of Christian saints that is actually a misunderstanding of the Buddha's life story. So they made elements of the Buddha's life stories, and they made it into 2 saints, Balaam and Josaphat. And in that way, the Buddha life stories changed into the stories of Christian saints through Persia, Georgia, Arabic sources, entered Greek sources, and then Latin sources, and became known in Europe. That's just a very curious thing. And then obviously you had with coming of colonization a lot of encounters. And the ways that these encounters are elite in the sense of power, in a sense of education, scholars, philosophers, and then slowly it changed to migration. The first Asian migrations, for instance, to the US already in the 19th century. A lot of Chinese people come working at the railroads in the US, bringing their form of Buddhism with them. Right? And then finally you get from the end of the 19th century on conversions, and then more and more conversions from the 1950s onwards. So I just gave you some, I skip that for now, I can talk a little bit more about that. Very important for the beginning of Buddhist modernism was certainly the first Parliament of the World's Religion in Chicago in 1893. Here, this modernist Sri Lankese monk, Anagarika Dharmapala, he intended and brought a lot of attention to the revival of what he thought was early Buddhist ideas and practices into Theravada. As you know, with the foundation of the Mahabodhi Society, there was a revival of interest of Buddhist places, archaeology and practice in mainland India itself. You know? Dharmapala actually started now after the Chicago 1893, the American branch of the Mahabodhi Society. That became a major vehicle of globalization. You have also elite philosophers like the German Arthur Schopenhauer. He was very interested in Indian philosophy, although I feel he misunderstood also a lot of it. But he was actually more interested in Vedanta, but also received some of early Mahayana Madhyamaka philosophy, and that then went on with Friedrich Nietzsche's philosophy, you know, who this represented in many ways Buddhism, but also made Buddhism as a form of nihilism popular in intellectual circles at the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century, and so on. You have very influential cultural milestones of Buddhism in Europe, Edward Arnold's Light of Asia, then very importantly the founding of this Theosophical Society by Henry Olcott and Madame Blavatsky. The Theosophists are like Western mysticists, they took a lot of Buddhist ideas, and Olcott himself becomes very, very important for the revival of what he sees original Buddhism. You know, in Theravada Buddhism, there's a huge rhetoric about that Theravada is original Buddhism, which is not true. It's simply not true. But that is the rhetoric, and that comes a little bit from that modernist idea, Dhammapala, and from Colonel Henry Olcott, who interpreted a lot of Theravada in the form of Buddhism. We all know when you read the Theravada handbooks, compendiums of the classical Pali commentaries of the 4th and 5th century, so Buddha Ghosa and so on, we all know that this is often deviating from what we find in the early sutras. Yeah? But nevertheless, in the 19th century, there was this movement to say, well, okay, Theravada and early Buddhism is the same. And actually, we are the original Buddhism. Theravada is original Buddhism. Yeah? And that is a little bit has to do with the way of Henry Olcott especially presented Buddhism. You have German writer Hermann Hesse in his very famous adaptation of the life story of the Buddha, Siddhartha, very famous novel, became very, very influential. And then obviously after the Second World War, you have the Beat generation, you have the popularization of Zen, things like prayer six, Zen and the art of motorcycle maintenance. You think, what is that about? But you know, that is then typical for the way of Buddhism globalizes after Second World War. I have so much to tell you, so I will just go on. If we just look at Olcott again, when you see how Olcott presents Buddhism to his audience in America and in Europe, then he takes from Buddhist text terminology, but puts it in his own Protestant mindset. So he never leaves his own Protestant presuppositions and just starts using Buddhist terminology with a distinct theosophical accent. So in that way, the mainstream presentation of Buddhism as something that is in line or understandable, intelligible and knowable through Christian Protestantism has become popularized. And that is something that still is very important for you to understand. While Protestantism or Christianity, it is strong and weird in America, let us stay away from it. It's very weird. In Europe, it's not there anymore, really. So in Netherlands, for instance, only 10 to 20% are Christian. Yeah? The rest do not believe it anyway. But it is still cultural, very, very important. And Protestantism, as you know, is opposed to Roman Catholic Christianity, has an emphasis on sobriety, no rituals, rationalism. It's just about the word of the book. It's just about thinking. It's just about rational accepting, for instance, that God is the creator and so on. Yeah? And that is very much in line with how people see Buddhism also in the West. It's something where rituals and matters of the heart, matters of devotion, for instance, humility, and so on, plays a role. That is not something people want to see in Buddhism. What they want to see is rationalism, is common sense, is positivism, is psychology, and is gain for their own improvement. So usually you would say we start Buddhism. How do we start Buddhism? How do we start Buddhism? When the Buddha sends away, yeah, you are missionaries, okay? So the Buddha, what did he do when he sends away? Yeah? He tells his students to go out for the sake of the many, for the sake of all human beings. Sarvahitaya. Sarva Sattva Hitaya. In some Pali sources it's Buddha, yeah, so for the many, and some most paper is Sarva in Sanskrit. I always quote Sanskrit because, but you could say Sarva, yeah? Okay. So, for the sake of all. That means it's about altruism. Don't start Buddhism if you don't want to be altruistic. Don't start Buddhism if you don't have a compassionate heart. Now, in contrast to that, that is not very much what we find, what people are interested when they come to Buddhism in the West. What they're interested is not Sarva Sattva Hitaya, for the benefit of all beings. It's for the benefit of me, for myself. Right? So they're looking for, how can I get happy? How can I get successful? How can I get all kinds of things, you know? And that is a huge danger, because what do? At the one hand, we have in Buddhism the means, through mindfulness, through calm abiding and so on, to help people when they are depressed and when they are anxious and when they're suffering. But at the other hand, we do that in Buddhism only on the basis of altruism. Only on the basis of because we want to help others, not because we want to do it for ourselves. So if we take away the ethical foundation of mindfulness, we are left with a perversion of mindfulness. Because then you can use mindfulness to be more successful, more powerful. You can use it to be nasty to other people. You can even train soldiers. Something that really is mindfulness training for taking a technique from Buddhism, way the foundation of Buddhism, all we do benefit passionate, altruistic, and and what we are left is a shell. But this is what we are dealing with. Most people come to us, I'm teaching chaplains. So we have people who are not Buddhist chaplain, because they think we as Buddhists, we are maybe not so judgmental as so they do bad things, judge because we all do. Buddhism is not about sin, but it's about stupidity. Buddhism is stupid. Avidya is general. So then so many people ask for Buddhist chaplains. They ask, I teach them in our chaplains. And I teach, we need to make that we give them the chance to ethically prove. Well, they don't want actually to learn about Buddhism. They just want to tell their story, yeah, and not being judged. And that is fine for the first or two sessions. Yeah? But if that's all there is, then just some sort of apology. Yeah? So what we need to do, gradually, again and again, instill a sense of altruism, a sense of passion, a sense of transformation. Will on. When you go to Europe, when you go to America, this is what that's great. I want to learn mindfulness so I can be more successful in my business, or I want to be less depressed so I can make more money. And so that is the situation you. And so you need to be very skilled. Maya Kaushalya. Very, very strong scope in ethics, Shila, virtue. Teach virtue. Start with altruism. How can we relax the ego? How can we relax the ego without strong motivation and aspiration for the better? Otherwise, mindfulness becomes just another for ego cementation, for enforcement. See that? Modern mindfulness. To let go. At the same time, also understand society just leave my PowerPoint now because it's a little. I think some things are important. When I come back, we can talk a little. So, society is in generally hostile to mysticism. Generally hostile to rituals. It's hostile to hierarchy. It's so So if you go there and think, oh, I'm a monk, I have robes, I'm better, and I saw that here. Nobody here wrote to me, although I'm a monk, nobody called me venerable, although I'm most venerable, but I don't wear my robe. Nobody makes see my shaved hair. So nobody a robe. Think, well, oh, first show me who you are, if I respect you. Have title or robe, people think, well, oh, you have to respect me. That's not what you will encounter. People will be more suspicious. Walk around. Also, don't or talk down minority. Remember that in early Buddhism said, matter whether same quality, very, very have to let expect go down for you just because that is a people are ahead or so. Oh, this person wants good. Very, very always Europe, you steal money from the temple, will damage Buddhism. Go to Europe, have an affair with a woman or with a man, I don't know. When you have celebration, you will damage Buddhism. Happens here. But Europe damage I'm not asking for others. That is the wonderful thing. Power, not destroying. My first name very difficult. I thought of this. Sense is my first Dharma name because it's how I try to be. My advice for you. Going from our don't reflect. Big welcome from the back to make just part of the ecosystem. But that if you do that, then Dhamma will I have some. Okay, we did all this. Questions? I try to give you very good English. Second, learn about culture. Culture you are coming expected to be very different. Don't try to blend in. Not always the market. Martin, come and say, oh, this is very interesting, but then the book on Buddhism, I understand. Very persistent, always reminding people. I'm happy. Interested. Never teach. I don't sense what Karl Marx taught practice about suppressing. So maybe don't talk too much about communism. Most people have a very, very negative idea of Soviet Union. So, but one of your talked about Buddhist socialism. also not some people that thing. I think first of all, we are not going to be able. But what is in everyone knows likes, let go of like and let go I come. Where does it come from? We are Thai and Khmer. Just artificial pancha. But this is Thai. And he leads them to the recognition hopes, fears, all get born but it's we can check ourselves, the community already. Food. Make difference. That is enlightenment grata ikaras. What is it? don't problem touch right and then negative star